Hello and good afternoon. Welcome to our live streaming event for the Webequay Supply Road project. I'm Marion Tibor McMahon, Engagement Specialist, and here with me today is
Don Parkinson.
We are the engagement team for the Webequay Supply Road project. Typically, we would be visiting Indigenous communities to consult and engage with them on the project. However, in light of COVID-19 pandemic, we are adapting to our new normal and will be hosting a series of these live streaming sessions weekly, every Wednesday at 1 p.m. and 4 p.m., focusing on different topics and areas of the environmental assessment for the project. Please do engage with us throughout the session. You can send us your questions and we'll answer them live for you. So you can do so by text by going through 807-630-1864 or by email and sending it to kathy.banning@supplyroad.ca. That is cathy.banning@supplyroad.ca.
With us today is Jon Cooper, Water Resources Engineer with S&C Lavalin, the firm leading the technical portion of the environmental assessment and preliminary engineering. Jon is here to talk about one of the most important considerations in the environmental assessment of the project, surface water hydrology, which basically looks at the amount of surface water and the movement of surface water over the land. Following that, we will talk about water considerations in road design. We know community members are very concerned about water, and we want to make sure that they understand that it will be studied thoroughly in our EA, or environmental assessment work. Thanks for joining us today, Jon. So Jon, looking at the area covered by the Webequay Supply Road corridor, how would you describe it in terms of the amount of surface water and how the surface water is distributed over the land?
Hey guys, thanks for having me. Good to talk with you guys. Good question, Don. So the whole Webequay Supply Road area is pretty flat. There's not a lot of topographical relief in general. Water tends to be, it's a pretty flat area, so there tends to be a lot of pooling. There's a lot of lakes, a lot of surface water that sort of accumulates. And save for the major river courses, there's not a whole lot of quick moving water. So water just it rains, it sort of sits there, it slowly goes through the area, but there's not a lot of, large water movement, we'll say.
Great. Are there aspects of the area that are unique when it comes to surface water?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is just how flat it is and how much water just sort of attenuates. So there's a lot of lakes, a lot of muskeg, a lot of bog that just sort of acts as sponge and sort of just keeps the water there for a period of time and prevents sort of fast moving water. So I think that's one of the more unique areas for the water.
Jon, when it comes to hydrology, what will you be looking at as part of the environmental assessment? Why is this work important to the Webequay Supply Road environmental assessment?
So in terms of hydrology and any sort of road design or any sort of engineering project, you kind of want to look at how much water you're dealing with, right? So especially when you're looking at water course crossings, putting in culverts or bridges or even putting in a road, you want to know how much water you actually have to contend with. Is it a lot of water? Is it seasonal water? Especially with such a unique landscape, you don't want to put a barrier in that then messes up the natural habitat and the natural features of the water courses. So the big aspect for hydrology is just understanding how much water you have, where water occurs, how water moves through the area, and that way any design can be mitigated through construction techniques or through the actual design itself to try to limit the effect or the impact to the natural landscape with respect to water.
Great. How many watersheds does the planned road corridor run through, and how big are these watersheds?
So it cuts through three major watersheds. So the Appowatascot, the Muckaty, and the Winisk. Each one of those is thousands of kilometers, square kilometers. They're massive. But the roadway itself is proposed to have 26 individual watercourse crossings. And each one of those has its own sort of sub-watershed or its own little catchment, we'll call it. And those range in size from under a square kilometer to just over around 1,500 square kilometers. So they range in size, and each one has its own kind of features.
John, many people are talking about the muskeg areas in the James Bay lowlands that part of the road runs through. How does water behave in these areas?
So essentially, muskeg is dead or decomposing plant material that's been waterlogged. So what happens is water sort of gets trapped through permafrost, clay, or bedrock, and is very slow moving. So, over time, plant material, sort of gets trapped, and animals and whatnot decay and break down within that watershed, that waterlogged area. And it's in terms of water, there is not a lot of movement in it. So water, when it rains, will kind of go in, surface water flow will flow out, between pools, but essentially water is just trapped there. So in terms of water movement in that area, there's very slow moving or non-existent water movement.
Is the entire project area treated the same when it comes to surface water, or do you have to treat some areas differently when you do your work?
So I think each area is treated generally the same in terms of the approach you would take. So you start with a desktop study, and then you sort of look at what available data is. But when you go down to looking at individual crossings, you have to take into account the specific unique characteristics of each crossing location. As I said, the muskeg has its own challenges, and water will behave differently in that sort of crossing than it would with a major uh, river that has a defined channel that's all bedrock, right? So I think you have to take each catchment into consideration when you're designing anything.
What kinds of things, John, specifically do you, in your work on surface water, um, do to make sure that the road won't impact the environment?
Yeah, good question, Don, and that's a very important aspect of this project. So for me, being a water guy, one of the biggest things would be sort of flooding or making sure that you're not impeding the natural flow, right? Like, these are natural water courses. They want to go where they want to go. And if you try to alter that, you could potentially mess up the entire area, not just in terms of water, but in terms of riparian area or wildlife habitat. So it's, kind of we touched on step one is you really want to figure out how much flow you're dealing with, the seasonality of it, and then, in your design, mitigate that as much as possible and keep the natural order of flow um, as much as you can. So you want to keep water going where it's naturally and is occurring and is going.
So, John, at the water crossings, how can you predict how much water will be going under a bridge or through a culvert pipe? What tools do you use?
Good question. There's entire university courses on this, but essentially, it comes down to what data you have. So you look at Water Survey Canada gauges or any um, flow monitoring that may be in the area. That's your first step. You can then take that and apply it to a similar like-minded catchment. Um, so there's lots of computer software programs or empirical calculations you can do for that sort of stuff. But essentially, the big one is you come up with a method to figure out how much flow you have, and then you just want to make sure your hydraulic opening, so how big your crossing is, can pass that flow without causing too much flooding. So you don't want to put a little pinch point in a hose that then backwaters the bathtub, kind of thing.
John, would you be available to meet with community members if they have more information to provide about surface water and perhaps changes in patterns, water patterns that they've seen over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as the project progresses, we'd love to hear from people that actually live in the community, that actually understand the landscape better than we do. I mean, that's invaluable knowledge. So absolutely, we'd love to talk to people.
That's great, John. That those getting that information is really important to us, and I can't emphasize enough to community members to provide that kind of information. And we know with climate change, there's been impacts, whether it's water, volumes of water and distribution of water. So anytime we can collect that information from community members who are there in the community all the time and have been there for years and have seen these changes, it's helpful to us. I think now what we're going to do is move on to the second part of our discussion with Jon, and that's about water and its consideration in road design. It's probably the biggest factor that needs to be considered in road design. So, Marion, I'll pass the baton over to you to start the questions on that.
Sure. So, Jon, we are hearing from our engineering team that the biggest road design and construction challenge will be through the muskeg in the east-west portion of the road. Why is this area such a challenge?
Yeah, so I think engineers and designers have grappled with muskeg for hundreds of years. The biggest thing is it's such a waterlogged material. It has no strength. So it's essentially like building a road on cream cheese or on a really soft material. So whatever aggregate you put down or whatever you put your road material in, it just sort of disappears. It just sinks. So it's challenging from that aspect. You can't really build a traditional gravel road on it per se. It's just has no strength. There's no foundation. We'll say.
Jon, how thick does the peat get in the muskeg areas? Can you give us a bit of an idea of that?
Yeah, so I mean, it ranges to a couple meters to, I think the largest we found was around 3 meters deep, so about 10 feet. So it's substantial. It's pretty thick.
Great. So, Jon, what are the problems associated with removing the peats to build the road?
Sort of what I previously said, the material, the peat itself has no strength, so it has no shear strength. So as soon as you excavate it out, it just sort of falls in on itself. So it's kind of like building a sandcastle. So if you were to dig a big hole in sand, it just falls in on itself. So in order to actually physically excavate that material, if you wanted to do so, your side slope would have to be pretty wide. So your actual footprint of what you're excavating is significantly larger than what your road would be. So from that aspect, it's not a viable option, and you probably, yeah, I don't think you could build a road that way in this area.
Jon, how would you build the road on muskeg? How do you make it strong enough to hold the weight of vehicles?
Yeah, so essentially, I mean, your first option, which is not viable in my opinion, is to excavate and replace that material. But you're talking 10 meters at, let's say a 10-to-1 side slope. So you have to go out 10 meters for every 1 meter you're excavating. It's too big of a footprint. So there's other options you could do. The one that we're considering the most is like call it a floating road. So you put down a geosynthetic, so like a plastic woven material that actually spreads out the load of the road itself. So think of it more as like a snowshoe. So the road is essentially built on top of a snowshoe that will allow a little bit of compression, but the overall weight of the road and the vehicles it is absorbed within that and material and sort of spread over a larger area without having to excavate or remove the peats.
So muskeg is like a floating mat of vegetation sitting on a sheet of slow-moving water. With a road in place, how is the water still allowed to flow?
So as I said, with a floating road, you will still have continuity between the bog, between the muskeg. So even though you're building something on top, the subsurface flow will still be able to move because you're not actually building a barrier in the way. And any surface water that occurs, you would put in some culverts or maybe some material that can actually allow flow to go between it, some pervious type of material, rock fill or something of that nature. So, the road won't have an effect on the groundwater flow, and you can mitigate the surface flow by putting, culverts or an avenue for the water to actually move across the road.
Jon, from from the first part of our discussion, I understand there's 26 water crossings along the proposed road corridor. How do you decide what kind of structure, such as a bridge or a culvert, goes at each crossing? What things do you consider when you're figuring that stuff out?
Yeah, good question, Don. And that's sort of the meat and potatoes of the engineering aspect of this project. I think the first step is you need to know what kind of flow you're dealing with. I mean, if you're dealing with a large river, you're not going to put it in a culvert. If you're dealing with a small crossing that you could, almost walk over, then you're not going to put a bridge. So I think the first step is sort of how much flow you're dealing with and what effects you want to have if you put a pinch point there. The second would be, what kind of foundations do you have? You're not going to build a bridge with big abutments on muskeg. I mean, it's just not feasible in certain cases, right? So if you have good rock, you have solid, competent ground, that changes what your foundation would be. Other factors sort of outside the engineering realm would be your environmental considerations. And these are big on this project. So things like fish habitat. So if it's a high fish habitat with a lot of resource that you want to minimize the impact to, you might put an open bottom culvert. So you don't change what the stream looks like. You just sort of put a culvert on over top. So material selection as well, right? If you're dealing with very acidic conditions that muskeg can be, you don't want to put a material that could break down over time, and you want to put something that won't have any leaching or any environmental concerns. So there's a lot to it, and this is it's a fine balance and an intimate relationship between environmental and engineering.
Great. So for culvert pipes, how do you know what size of pipe to use? What tools do you use to make decisions? Oh, actually, we just got a text here, a question from a Facebook user. Is the road to be temporary or permanent? That is the question that we got from Dan Pellerin here on Facebook. Thank you, Dan, for joining us today and watching us via Facebook and YouTube and asking us that question. So the question is again, is the road to be temporary or permanent?
I can answer that one. That it's meant to be permanent. It's an all-season road. Okay, John. Marion, I think you were in the middle of asking a question.
I was, and then we got that question. So I just want to remind viewers again to please text us your questions at 807-630-1864. Again, please continue engaging with us. Also email us at kathy.banning@supplyroad.ca. So now, actually Dan sent us a follow-up question again, so we'll just continue on with that. Thank you so much for your question again, Dan. Has a floating roadbed been done where there is a log of weather changes? Oh, good question. Very interesting.
I would imagine it has been done, but I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay.
John, maybe do you want to jump in and try and answer that question?
Yeah, I'm not aware of one that's been done in Northern Ontario. I mean, I'm the water guy, not the road guy per se. I believe these type of roads have been done in Manitoba before. They've certainly been done in, say, resource roads like logging roads or that sort of thing. Typically, more like the corridoral style of road. So when you sort of slash and cover, where you just put down a bunch of trees and then cover it with material, that's essentially the same mechanism that this road would be, but on a more rudimentary scale. So I think this type of road has been done generally before. Hopefully that answers your question, Dan.
Marion,
okay, so
back to your question.
Continue back to my question about culvert pipes. So how do you know what size of pipe to use, and what tools do you use to make these decisions?
So with anything to do with culverts or crossings, it really comes down to flow. So how much flow you're dealing with. So if you have a lot of flow, you're going to need a bigger pipe. Not as much flow, maybe a smaller pipe. The biggest thing is what are your constraints? So if you want to cause no backwater, then you go with a bigger thing. If you can live with a little bit of backwater, a little bit of down or upstream flooding, you could size the pipe a little bit smaller. But there's a bunch of equations, and there's some computer software programs out there that help us with all these decisions.
John, what will be done to make sure fish will use the culvert pipes to travel from one side of the road to the other?
Yeah, good question, Don. And this kind of goes back to my comment about the intimacy between engineering and environmental, right? So, I mean, you talk to a lot of engineers and it's just get it done sometimes, right? Whereas I think we're taking the appropriate approach where we're incorporating a lot of the environmental considerations. We work hand in hand with our aquatics team. So we really want to design culverts that fish will use. So, in that regard, what we've considered and what I'm going forward with is a lot of our culverts will be open bottom. So we're not actually affecting the stream bed itself as much as we can. In cases where we do need to put an actual full barrel culvert, you can do things like you inset it a bit. You can put stream material in the actual base of the culvert. So you can sort of replicate the fish habitat within the culvert itself to try to encourage fish use.
Okay, great. So what can you do as part of road design to limit impacts in case of spills?
There's a lot of things can be done. So, for instance, in this project, what we're considering is, it's a wide road with a bit of a shoulder feature, as most roads would have, and then either a bit of a ditch or even potentially some a little buffer of, say, sacrificial material that can actually absorb spills. So if a spill does occur, you can send a crew out there and actually take out the material on the shoulder and send it off for either treatment or disposal. And that way it actually sort of absorbs and contains the spilled material. So the biggest thing is just creating a bit of a buffer between the road itself and the important natural habitat.
John, thanks for joining us today. Water, both its quantity and quality, is very important to community members, as you know. I know they'll be interested in seeing the results of your work, and hang in there, John, because I think we might be getting some questions. Let's see if we've got some questions from some of our viewers. Do we have any questions out there?
Let's take a look here. I just want to remind our viewers out there on Facebook and YouTube, thank you so much for joining us today. We will be doing another session this afternoon at 4 o'clock with John. Please do come with your questions. We'll answer them live for you. Please text us at 807-630-1864. We are also going to be playing a video right now, so think about your questions as you're watching this video. And again, you can email us at kathy.banning@supplyroad.ca. So we want to hear from you. Please ask us your questions.
It's a bit of a long taxi this morning. We gotta go to the other side of the lake. Looks like you got the business class
So we're conducting a variety of wildlife surveys for the project. We make sure that we do a balance of surveys for mammals and for birds, and with a specific focus on species at risk, species whose populations are in decline, that we know are in decline. And the importance of the surveys is to determine the diversity of wildlife that we have out here, the proportions of different species that exist in the land, where and how many species we know are important resources for the area, and to make sure that we're aware of where the species that are in decline are occurring and whether they would be impacted by the project. Gathering data on the wildlife that's important to the community, whether it be game birds or large mammals such as moose or caribou, or fish, means that the mitigations that are put in place while the project is undertaken can minimize impacts to those species, and that we can make developers aware of where those resources are occurring, and that we can work with the community to come up with solutions to minimize impacts.
Great, hope you enjoyed our short little video with our wildlife biologist right there. So in the time of viewing that video, we received a follow-up question from Dan. We love your questions, so keep them coming, please. So Dan's question, John and Dawn, is what weight will the roadway support? Can either of you answer that question?
John, I'll let you take a stab at that.
I'd have to look back at what the design criteria for the road is, but it would essentially hold, itself, so whatever the aggregate material in the road topping would be, plus the design load of the vehicles. So, I mean, we can get back to you with the specifics if you'd like. We'd have to reach out to you to get a specific weight of the road, but essentially, whatever the design would be sufficient to hold itself in the vehicles.
Okay, great. Thanks for answering that, and thank you for your questions today, Dan. We greatly appreciate you tuning in to us and watching us on Facebook. Anything else?
No, I don't think there's any more
good.
questions.
No, okay, so with that then, we do want to remind everyone that we will be doing this live stream event again today at 4 p.m. So if you came in late throughout this session right now, please do tune in at 4 o'clock. So just want to remind everyone, this is just the beginning of our engagement process. Our engagement does not end here. It does. As we mentioned earlier, we're going to be doing live streaming events weekly, so please do put it in your calendars every Wednesday at 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. And we'll be focusing on different areas and topics of the environmental assessment process and the terms of reference that is out currently for review. For more information, please do visit our website at www.supplyroad.ca. There is a wealth of information that we have on there. We have fact sheets, we have podcasts and videos with WeatherQuake community members, as well as our subject matter experts. And we do have newsletters, which you should subscribe to off of our website, where we'll get updates as our project progresses. Also, please don't forget to follow our Facebook page, where you'll get updates on our future live streaming events and the topic for that week. So we hope that you do find these sessions useful for you, learning the project, learning about WeatherQuake Supply Road Project and the environmental assessment. We want to engage with you. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your comments. So please do tune in, answer us, or ask us your questions. Just send us messages on Facebook, send us your text messages again, and send us your emails, pardon me. So please stay safe, stay healthy, and we will catch you at our next live streaming event. Come back here at 4 o'clock. Thanks, everyone.